So let's start. When we talk about you being an Urbatect, and right from the title, Architecture is Obsolete, Rise of the Urbatects, the first question that comes to everyone's mind is, what is an Urbatect?
Okay, hi everyone. To make it very, very simple, an Urbatect is a professional city maker or city designer. I have my first idea worth sharing if you want, will save you lots of money on tuition. Every one of us, without exception, is born an architect or an urban designer or a city designer. Nobody teaches an ant how to build its colony or a bird how to make its nest. We are born as a species city makers, city designers. It's our education that messes it up and teaches us to only rely on professional architects to do so. But even professional architects are clueless, really, because just the fact of living in a city makes you co-responsible for designing it. You know, where you place your car, the sound of your footsteps on the pavement, you know, your relationships, your loves, your hates, everything is about the city. It's not just the building that some architect made or the street that some urban designer made. The problem is 80% of us now live in cities, and there are no professionals trained to deal with this. So I'm suggesting to differentiate professional people who work with the architecture of the city and call them Urbatects instead of just city makers or city designers. So an Urbatect is a citizen, but who's professional at what he does.
Okay. What is the role of an architect then?
Architects, I think, at this stage of our history, are better off designing small houses in the suburbs. They are fantastic at doing so, but they are, by training, they are incapable of dealing with the complexities of the city. So I'm not saying architects should be thrown out of the equation altogether, but I think they should be thrown out of the city.
Only that. To you, the city evolves into something you call quantum city. Can you please explain that concept to us?
It doesn't really evolve into the quantum city. I think any living, vibrant, buzzing city is a quantum city. I'll explain, if you want, where this word comes from. I'm borrowing from quantum physics, which is the science of the subatomic world. And it's a fascinating world that just shows you a very, very different way of looking at things than what our current, at least, educational system tells us. I remember when I was in school, they used to tell us that the matter that makes up the universe is made up of these atoms that are made up themselves of a nucleus and some electrons, like small planets buzzing around it, with lots of space between. And that was a very comfortable idea because we recognize this vision of a ball rotating around another ball. And but what's interesting about it is that there was this void in the middle, and they used to tell us that there's void at the heart of matter. And so as an architect, later on, it was easy for me to imagine the city as just this, mass and void, and a lot of architects today continue to do this. They see the city as just the buildings and the void between, which ends up being the street. But at some point, I stumbled on what quantum theory, which is the more advanced vision of what the subatomic world is, describes. And it says that there are no small balls rotating around any other balls. It's just a collection of fields of energy that interact together, that just concentrations of energies changing with the situation, and possibilities, probabilities, uncertainties. All this changed completely this vision of a world made up of rotating balls and space. So for me, it was much closer to how I experienced the city as a citizen, not as an architect, which was a city in the world of relationships and possibilities and chaos in a way. I mean, this is actually a model of what the atom looks like if you were to represent it, compare it to this one. It turns out to be closer to this, and when you actually try to take let's call it a photograph for simplicity, it actually looks like this. It's a sea with ripples in it. So, I like that you started with the sound earlier, with these raindrops falling, and you can imagine that each atom is actually a raindrop in a field of energy, and this is how the universe is. It's not these balls rotating. So I built a whole theory around using this language to address the city, and it turned out quite useful.
To quote, you describe Quantum City as an exploration of the relationships between the history of science, urban design, and the concept of the city. But I'm interested in it in a more practical manner. What does it involve on the ground?
It involves on the ground, at least for me, to change the way we perceive the city. That's the first step. As I said, our education messes up our brains so bad that it's hard to later on, do lots of work on the ground without first working in education, working at the level of changing the perception of everyone. Now, having said that, when I looked at the history of science and the history of cities, it turns out that they are very linked together. We tend to build cities the way we understand the world. So if we imagine the world to be, a big sum of crazy forces of nature, we tend to fear designing in a way because we don't want to mess with this. Or we do the opposite and we try to impose a certain order. If we imagine the world to be, a world where there's a big religion, big figure called God that is the most important thing, then we design our cities around a church or around a mosque or whatever. I'm just simplifying here. And if we imagine the world to be a big machine, which is what we have done for the last 300 years, then we build the city as a machine, and very quickly this falls apart because a city cannot function as a machine. It's much more messy than this. Now, quantum theory has proven itself to be very practical and very correct in spite of all the weirdness that it says, because amongst other things, the internet, which is the basis of our technology today, is completely based on that. So the way we look at the world has been transformed into looking at it through the knowledge that quantum theory says. No one here maybe, or very few of you have heard of the word quantum theory or whatever, but the way we live, the way we connect with people, the way we interact and so on, owes a lot to this theory. And with time, this has made the whole lifestyle, and by extension, the worldview we have, shift. This is what we call a paradigm shift. So this is shifting. So it's shifting away from the mechanical world that I was describing into a more quantum, if you want to call it, which is more interconnected. Yeah. The problem is this is not fast enough, so we need, as educators, to make it faster. And this will change things on the ground.
Okay. This brings me to the next question. You believe architecture is obsolete, yet you teach architecture students, some of whom are in this room today.
They're useless.
Yeah. Do you believe your role to be that of missionary?
Somebody's laughing there because I think she knows what I'm going to say. Yes, I think in a way, yes. The crazy world of quantum theory is full of, almost, not to say spiritual, but life-changing notions that if you're used to a different way of looking at things and you learn about them, you're like, oh, you stop and think. You're saying, okay, maybe I understood things differently. Maybe by looking at things that are more that integrate more ideas of diversity and ideas where something and its opposite can coexist and so on. It's almost religious in a very ridiculous kind of way. So yes, maybe in that sense I am a missionary. But I am a man on a mission, yes, I think I am.
Okay. To you, the city is considered a memory storage medium. What does that specifically mean?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite themes, if you want. From the first time we created architecture, which is the moment where we went into a cave and decided to make it a shelter, we transformed it into a place where we actually put our story, where we tell our story. So the first caves were at the same time performance spaces where we performed to one another to tell them story around the campfire and so on. But we also drew on the walls images of our life, you know, of the hunt and whatever. We all have images in our mind of the Lascaux caves, prehistoric caves. And this was one of the only ways that we learned about these civilizations. So their cave, their dwelling, their architecture became the way they transferred knowledge to us. And you know, fast forward a few thousand years, we started building you know, crazy buildings in the desert at huge expense with thousands of slaves to put one person in them. We still do that today, but we don't. We still use the slaves, but we don't put anyone in the buildings somehow. But I have a bit of a secret to tell you. The pyramids, for example, were not built to put somebody in them. It was an excuse to get them to finance it. The pyramids and all these ancient constructions were made for this, to carve on them all the knowledge of the civilization that made them, to build within their you know, proportions, the way they're aligned to the stars and so on, all their worldview, how they imagined the world to be, how they lived their life. And if we didn't have this, we wouldn't know anything about these civilizations. So that, for me, was, again, one of the primary roles of architecture, memory archiving systems. We don't need to do this anymore. I mean, this is the Sistine Chapel, same story, you know, much closer to our civilization, much closer to us today. But that was what it was also. It was a way, it tells so many stories just on its walls. Now we don't do this anymore because we store our information on the internet, on a DVD, on a USB key, and so on. So that's another reason I say architecture, as we know it, is obsolete, because it doesn't have this role anymore.
A very important concept that you have is that of diventity, a word that you've coined.
Yeah.
Do you mind sharing what you mean by diventity?
Diventity is, I love this notion because it's such a simple word, but it's a collection, it's a concept, if you want, that links three very important generic notions: the notion of identity, the notion of diversity, and the notion of density. And there's absolutely no way to look at the city or understand the city or understand any living system without these three things. To give you a very simple example, do you remember when this guy was with the long hair doing his music at the beginning?
Eric Whitaker,
yeah. He put together thousands of people from different parts of the world through technology, obviously, but he put them in the same space. Okay, so he brought this diversity of voices, diversity of people into a concentration. That's density, a density of diversity. And he did it in a way that it was just the right amount of density and just the right amount of diversity, that it created something higher. It created this identity, which is this music that he invented. So this idea of being able to bring enough, just the right amounts of diversity and in together to create another identity is something that I think is crucial in the city. So I consider good urban spaces, good parts of a city are parts that have this quality, which is the ability to create identity out of diversity. I'm sure you're going to ask me about Beirut after this.
Yes, definitely. How does Beirut fulfill this sort of diventity?
Yeah, well, Beirut does it, and sometimes it does it more or less successfully. Again, the issue is not to just mix diversity or just mix different things together, different identities. Just try to find the right balance, because if you had brought all these sounds together, but if they didn't fit at a certain level, or there's too many of them, or not enough variety in them, and so on, you would get cacophony. You wouldn't get something you recognize as music. It's the same way in a city. So you need to bring in a diversity, let's say, of lifestyles. You need to bring in a diversity of economic levels. You need to bring in a diversity of physical forms, of architectural styles, of experiences, really, a diversity of experiences. Beirut does it, and in certain places perfectly. In certain places it just goes over the top and it explodes or implodes. And Urbatects, to go to first full circle, should be trained to be intuitively and creatively tuned to recognizing the right levels of diventity to be able to deal with the city. That's a very simple way of looking at this question.
My last question for today has to do with the way you see events. You describe landmarks and events as local wave disturbance sources. Is this a positive disruption? And how does a TEDx event like this one fulfill that role? Exactly like that one.
Unexpectedly. Everything is in a city is an event, whether it's a building, the presence of the building is an event, the construction of the building is an event, the destruction of the building is an event. You coming out of the building is an event, you meeting a friend is an event. Every single thing in the city is an event. A TEDx is an event. So everything is an event, and everything has with it a kind of, my students know this, an event horizon, which is the territory that this event affects. Okay, so imagine the city is made up of these ripples with the event center and then the rippling effect going out. So obviously the more of these events we have, the more it starts to sound like the rain in that thing at the beginning. It's great. I mean, the right amount. Too much rain can hurt you as well, but still waters stink, so keep throwing these ripples. Yeah.
Thank you, Ayssar. Thank you so much.